Subtle results, still you, but with fewer lines. Botox Cosmetic, out of botulinum toxin A, is a prescription medicine used to temporarily make moderate to severe frown lines, crow's feet, and forehead lines look better in adults.
Effects of Botox Cosmetic may spread hours to weeks after injection, causing serious symptoms. Alert your doctor right away as difficulty swallowing, speaking, breathing, eye problems, or muscle weakness may be a sign of a life-threatening condition. Patients with these conditions before injection are at highest risk. Don't receive Botox Cosmetic if you have a skin infection. Side effects may include allergic reactions, injection site pain, headache, eyebrow and eyelid drooping, and eyelid swelling. Allergic reactions can include rash, welts, asthma symptoms, and dizziness. Tell your doctor about medical history, muscle or nerve conditions including ALS or Lou Gehrig's disease, myasthenia gravis, or Lambert-Eaton syndrome, and medications, including botulinum toxins, as these may increase the risk of serious side effects. For full safety information, visit BotoxCosmetic.com or call 877-351-0300.
See for yourself at BotoxCosmetic.com.
This episode of the NXIVM on Trial podcast features the first half of a panel discussion moderated by Brendan Lyons, the Times-Union State and Investigations Editor. The conversation, which was recorded earlier this month, includes Toni Natalie, Keith Raniere's ex-girlfriend who became a whistleblower on the shadowy organization, and Rick Ross, an internationally known expert of cults and a NXIVM foe. This episode, in addition to the Times-Union's continued NXIVM coverage, is made possible with the support of Jeff Anderson and Associates. Enjoy the show.
The interesting part with Toni's history with NXIVM is it goes back so far. And I think a lot of us, had wondered, what was it like in the early days before Keith became monk-like and had, become this fixture, this icon in this inner world of NXIVM. And so Toni, I was going to have a jumping off point, which is where your book started, which was great, which is you're in Rochester in 1991, and your husband convinces you to go to a seminar at a local hotel where there's a gentleman talking about a company called Consumers Byline, which we would later learn was a multi-level marketing scheme that had been shut down. So what was it like, that first interaction with the man known as Vanguard?
He wasn't Vanguard then. He was, it was his preparation to be Vanguard. He was touted as a businessman, smartest man in the world. I think the thing that I really want people to try to encapsulate is when I met Keith in 1991, there was no internet. So we're all so comfortable with, when we want an answer to a question, we look in the palm of our hands today. The internet didn't really even exist. Facebook really never became anything until, 2009. So in 91, when you met the quote-unquote smartest man in the world with a 240 IQ, thank you, Eastern District of New York, for blowing that out of the water. You looked in someone's eyes and they told you something and you believed them, because why not? So the premise on the presentation was triple major graduate from RPI, top problem solver in the world, and then his backstory was presented with Pamela Kayfritz from the Kayfritz family out of DC. They're a very well-known, wealthy family, and that they were backing his organization. A woman by the name of, Sydney Reynolds, who was she was appointed by Reagan to help women, empower women with business. And his father, who was an ad man and won multiple awards. So the Karen Anchoriner, who was an actuary, you were presented with these formidable people that had great accolades, and you believed it. It was a buying club. It looked, and I think it did wonderful things at the time as far as saving people money. And he looked like a geek. I mean, he just looked like a little, round, rosy cheeks and glasses and a bounce in his step. He wasn't Vanguard. He was the smartest man in the world, at least by his definition.
And following that presentation by him, which I think you were less than impressed with him in some ways, but he managed to get you here to Albany eventually. He managed, and that's always seems to be his way, in a way, to get you away from your husband. It seems he wanted to separate you out and to go to work on you. He saw something in you. He must have, right? Do you think that he immediately put his hooks into you when he laid eyes on you?
Knowing now what I know, I think that he looks for producers. I mean, a lot of times people will say to me, how stupid are these people that got involved? How did they get involved? He draws NXIVM, ESP, businesses like this, draw very smart people. They draw people that are seekers looking to do better in the world. And he finds producers. Keith is innately lazy. There's absolutely nothing original about him. He steals all of his concepts and ideas from other people. And I think what he saw in me and in my husband at the time were people that were producers and that worked hard.
And Rick, do you think that, the CBI, the government in the criminal case against Keith Raniere describes NXIVM as a multi-level marketing scheme? Only it's about human improvement, self-improvement. Do you see the foundation as you look back now at CBI of taking shape? Of how formative was his role in that company? Do you think in the direction that he would go eventually?
Well, I think that some of the core people, like Pam Kafritz, like Karen and others, were part of that CBI group. And even though CBI was shut down by attorney generals of numerous states for running a pyramid scheme illegally, those people continued to be loyal to Keith Raniere, and they followed him no matter what he was doing, and they became the core of what became NXIVM. And the way that I became aware of all of this was around 2002, a family whose adult children had become involved with what was then called ESP, Executive Success Programs, and they were coming to the Albany area to do training. They were actually from New Jersey and New York, in Manhattan. They were coming here, and it was upsetting the family. They were seeing how it was affecting them. And then they asked me to do interventions, which is what I do, to get people out of, to get their adult children out of NXIVM. And in the process, I had never heard of this group, Executive Success Programs. And gradually, with a private investigator that the family hired, I then found out about Consumer Byline. And I realized how that fed into NXIVM, or what we call ESP. And I could see that it was what we call Large Group Awareness Training, or an LGAT is the acronym, and that this is what I was dealing with. Because I had never heard of Keith Raniere, I had never heard of ESP or any of his doings. So it was a new thing to me, and I explored it, and the first thing I stumbled upon or found was this Consumer's Byline history of taking advantage of people and exploiting people.
And in that early phase, it seemed his motivation initially was to lure you in to be his lover, and that evolved pretty quickly, it seemed, as he got you here under the pretext of you and your husband, your business was struggling a little bit, the tanning salons were struggling a little bit, and so you went to him for a loan initially, right? And then that became a way for him. Really, it seemed almost like the way an inmate hooks a CO or something, that he's got you now. He's got a hook, he's got a way to draw you in.
What Keith does better than anything is he listens. He listens, he looks for the holes, he looks for the hooks, he looks for a way to draw you in. And it was about a year, and there were a lot of long phone calls and a lot of sharing of information and concepts. And yes, when my ex-husband and I had run into a financial situation, a problem, we turned to the person that we thought not only had a very successful business and that would be easy for him to help us, but because we were producers in his organization, that this was something he'd be willing to do. And with that hook, that's how he drew me in. That's how he drew me here to Albany, offering me a job.
And separated you two at the same time, right? Because you came here to run what was a spin-off sort of the group in skincare products.
Yes, it was
Yeah.
called Awaken, and it was a subsidiary, in fact, of Consumers Byline. They needed someone to run the skincare beauty side of the business. And because of my background, he thought this was a perfect match. And because of the fact that financially we needed this, we needed the job, we needed the work, I traveled back and forth for about 5 or 6 months, and then I eventually moved full-time to Albany.
And for those of you who follow NXIVM, you won't be shocked to know that Keith thought the best place for you to live was a townhome in Knox Woods, within walking distance of his. So,
Yeah.
and I love this part. But tell him about your first time walking into his home at 3 Flintlock, and what the place looked like.
Well, there's this whole image that's built up, this man with a 240 IQ, smartest man in the world, triple major graduate, someone that has no formal education. I am expecting concert pianist. Juilliard wanted him to come. I was expecting this beautiful townhouse. And what I walked into was disgusting. It was pretty dirty and scary and not anything at all of what I expected. Now, that young, naive person then, if I knew what I knew now, I would have seen that as one of the very large flags going, run, this is not what it appears to be. But, the presentation was, they were all close friends, saving their money, living together.
And this is Karen Unterreiner, Kristen Keefe, and Pam Kafritz are all within that,
Yes.
those 2 homes that are next to each other.
One home.
One home?
3 Flintlock, they were all living in the same
Okay.
home. So when I finally made the move to Albany and said, okay, I want to live, I don't want to live in Knox Woods. I knew even then that I didn't want to be there. But the only place that Kristen could find for me, literally, was in the backyard. You'd walk out my back door to their back door. And, Keith's explanation was they were friends. There was nothing going on physically with anyone, and they were saving money. This is what they did. And the proximity, wasn't that wonderful? It's the universe putting us together. Oh, yes.
And so he's notorious for his ability to compartmentalize his people.
Very much so.
And so another arguably red flag is that your intimate relationship with him has to be hidden, right? You can't walk in together. Karen can't know, who was his girlfriend in college, even though they're no longer together. But he convinces you of that for a while, right?
Yes.
That we need to keep this secret. What do you think is going on there? And I want to hear your thoughts on that too, Rick, about what in his mind he's doing.
Well, it's getting me here under one pretense, and then once I'm here, then kind of the things shift. And what Keith does, and I go into detail in the book about my own personal history as a child, is he finds those traumas in your past and he uses them. He uses them to control you. He uses them to manipulate you. And he used my own insecurities so that when it came to that pivotal point where, no, we can't share this with anyone because, Toni, you have no formal education. People think you just got the job because you're my girlfriend, and you don't want people to think that, do you? Well, okay, no, I don't. And had I had the self-awareness that I later gained through therapy and friends and family, I would have said that has nothing to do with it. But then I fell right into step and said, okay, we won't tell anyone.
And meanwhile, there's things happening in front of you that you wouldn't be aware of for many years, such as he's tutoring a 13-year-old girl in math. And that becomes, what a compassionate guy. Look at him.
Right.
He's so busy, he's so important, and he's devoting his time to her. And it would turn out that the allegations are that he was raping her at that time. And so, is that, looking back on something, that's got to be hard to think about now, because
it's very hard, because I would watch him tutor this girl and spend time with her and think how lucky she was, because smartest man in the world is spending time with you. And then he would come home and play with my son. So that the image either that I wanted in my mind or that he presented in my mind was so far from what the truth was, that when the reality years later came in, you really take a hard look at everything that you believed. Because if just as they do in NXIVM or ESP or any large group like this, they take a little bit of truth and they throw a lot of crap around it. And you see that truth and you go, well, that's true. So if that's true, is the other true? And he spins it. It's just spinning it until he gets you to the point where you're seeing things the way he wants you to.
And Rick, is that his behavior in that sense? Is it unique to leaders of cult-like organizations, or is this something you think that it's kind of his calling card? His ability, in other words, to, whether it be, years later, the DOS organization, to keep things secret from people. It seemed that even his closest confidants weren't always aware of what the other one might know or might be working on.
Well, I think there are a lot of things that are unique to NXIVM, that are unique to Keith Raniere. For example, he was not a charismatic leader, in my opinion. He looked like a garden gnome. He had the excitement of a garden gnome. I met him. I spoke with him at length, and he just wasn't about charisma. What he was about was manipulation. That was his genius. He had an innate sense that he could smell the vulnerabilities of people. And when he discovered a vulnerability, he would drill down into it and use it to leverage that person and crack them open. And it would be done over a period of time. And that was his ability. And when he was listening to people, which he would do for hours on end, he was listening for that pain. He was listening for that vulnerability so that he could use it to take them over, to control them, to get them to do things, at times criminal things, on his behalf. Now, there's a consistent pattern with that, which I write about in my book, which is what we call cult brainwashing, which is just a pop culture term to describe a synthesis of coercive persuasion, influence techniques, and what has been described as thought reform. And Raniere studied it. He studied it in great depth. He studied Scientology. He studied coercive persuasion, neuro-linguistic programming, hypnosis. I mean, this was a guy who, some cult leaders that I've dealt with over the years, they would come by their method of control and manipulation by hit and miss. And they would, or they would have a kind of a sense of it that they almost intuitively used. In Raniere's case, he studied. He studied and he studied and he studied, like he did at Rensselaer, though not that great because his grades, as were later exposed, were not that great. But what he would do is, in coercive persuasion, there are three basic stages of it, as identified by Edgar Schein, who taught at MIT. First, you unfreeze a person, you break them, you find their breaking point, and that can be they were molested as a child, they had a terrible death in the family that horrified them. There was something in their life that was causing them pain. You identify that, you break them. And the NXIVM would have like 16-day intensives where people would be methodically shepherded through this process of wearing them out through sleep deprivation, through isolation, through constant exercises called EMs, exploration of meaning, in which you had to empty yourself, tell them everything about yourself. So in that process, Raniere and his people, his coaches, would break people down. And then the next thing they would do is he would then expound rational inquiry, his so-called philosophy, which was part Scientology, part Ayn Rand, part Werner Erhard, the Forum, Landmark Education, a little bit of Socrates, the Socratic method of questioning, and whatever. Amway was in there, because he had been an Amway distributor. So there was
and
a little.
That's why they're $7,500 a course, but if you get 3 people to sign up, yours is free.
Right.
So you can see the foundation of.
Well, and then don't forget that because of his martial arts background as a child, you also got a sash. and you could get different color
your skull.
sashes to elevate you, but of course, nothing could elevate you as high as Vanguard. But then he would, after he broke you down, he would then put you through these changes by downloading his philosophy in an isolated setting where you had no outside frame of reference, no accurate feedback from the people around you who were just reinforcing what he said. And then subsequently, then he would go through the refreezing process, or he would solidify where you were. And that was achieved by largely social isolation, where the people, even though they were living here in the Albany area, were living collectively in group housing, were constantly reinforcing each other. And if there was a family member, an old friend who was critical of NXIVM, they were cut off. They would be labeled as suppressives. And I'm sitting next to like the queen of suppression, you know, because she was labeled as, he actually had a module in which he taught people how badly they could fall. That was literally called The Fall, which was all about Toni Natalie and how evil she was and how terrible she was. And don't ever follow in her footsteps or you'll be sorry. So there was this dread about leaving. There was no legitimate reason to leave. And anyone who had doubts or alternate ideas was labeled in a negative way. And so in that way, Raniere created a kind of echo chamber right here in Albany. And in that area of Clifton Park, where all these people would migrate from all over, from Mexico, Canada, around the United States, and they would then live collectively and reinforce each other on a daily basis. So those three steps, the breaking, the changing, and the locking in, is the process of coercive persuasion, and he was an expert at that.
NXIVM on Trial is a production of the Times-Union. Our watchdog reporting on NXIVM and other topics is supported in large part by our subscribers. If deep coverage of issues that matter to the Capital Region is important to you and your family, please consider signing up for our digital subscription today. Just visit timesunion.com. Thanks, and enjoy the show.
Some of that happened to you, you know, I think when you were here in the early phases, they have you in a hotel room, right, where they insist that you need to stay awake. We're keeping you up for long hours, I thought. But it was interesting, at one point, the Vanguard, I think he went home to sleep. But
The Vanguard.
but they, you know, but he created this rift, true or not, and you know, it's in your book. I don't want to pry it personal, but you know, he went after a weakness. He thought he planted the seed to you that the reason your husband and you aren't intimate is because he's sleeping with your nanny. So he takes these approaches, right, to try to. His first goal is what? To get you away from your husband, you think?
His first goal with anyone is to isolate. So, you know, causing a wedge between my husband and I was his first step. And using things that I had shared with him as a friend are the things that he later kind of, you pull that thread and you just keep going. And claiming that he was having an affair with my nanny, which I now know is absolutely absurd, is how he started that wedge between us. And then the driving back and forth and the endless hours and the up all night was, so Keith was going to help me with my molestation, always, and even up until the end with Nancy was apparently my biggest problem. It was my issue, as they call it. And in order for him to help me with that, what he did was he literally kept me up for, it was like 3 to 4 days of just repetitive. I now know I now know through good therapy that the last thing you do with a victim is to re-victimize them. So having someone live over a trauma over and over and over again, all it does is re-victimize the victim. And something that they became experts at doing, even within the NXIVM cult. I think it's how they got people to where they are. It's sleep deprivation, it's compartmentalizing. So there was, as Rick pointed out, the core people that were with him back when I met him in the early CBI days were with him at the end when he was arrested in Mexico. And you can't get to where you are without enablers. Keith's lazy, so he isn't really going to do anything on his own, but he's going to have people around him that enable him to do that. And it's those enablers that helped him to be able to draw people in. Because you weren't so, I think in the later years, connected with him. It was the person that brought you into the group. So it would layer down almost to the people that you were associated with.
They were also his soldiers when he needed to attack, right? And when you tried to break away were breaking away and did break away, they were the ones who often came for you, right? Whether it was Kristen or trying to say you're doing the wrong thing, and making you feel guilty about it. He really wanted to get you back, it seemed, for a while.
Yeah, as Rick may be able to put it, the level of gaslighting that I didn't realize that that's what it was then, that I know now was unrelenting. I mean, it went on for months, and letter after letter after letter, and then breaking into my house and opening cupboard doors, or breaking into my house and unmaking the bed, and doing these things just to let you know you're not safe. You need to come back. So you're fried.
And I used to think that Toni, when she first talked to me, which was maybe more than 15 years ago, I thought, this woman is really paranoid. But I found out that she wasn't paranoid, she was perceptive. And that the things that I thought were paranoia were in fact happening. I mean, they were at one point buying my garbage. They penetrated my private banking records, my phone records. They had me under surveillance. They set me up in a phony intervention case that they were going to get me out on a cruise ship somewhere, and I was going to do an intervention there. My lawyer said, I don't know if you would ever come back from that cruise. So this was a relentless pursuit. I mean, there was a point where I said, I thought, Toni needs to get a life. She needs to just let go of Keith Raniere. But then I realized he would not let her let go. He was relentless. She would try to escape from him, try to get away from him, and he would pursue her and pursue her. And I also realized, after being sued for almost 14 years, can you imagine being in one lawsuit for 14 years?
So let's set that up. So Rick had helped the family, the Suttons he referenced earlier, who wanted to get their children out, their adult children, especially their son Michael. And in the first stages of his efforts to get Michael out, they did an intervention in Boca Raton, Florida. And Michael, for much of that, is on the phone with Nancy Salzman, who's convincing him that what you're saying is not truthful. And eventually they're pushing for, it seemed almost desperate, to why don't we have a psychologist, a clinical psychologist, an expert, analyze NXIVM and tell the Suttons, because it's so meaningful to them to have, especially I think these wealthy members, these connected members. And so you do that. You get these experts, and what they say about NXIVM, of course, is that it's a cult, I think, in sum and substance, and you put those reports on your website. That formed the basis for NXIVM to then pursue Rick in federal court. It was filed first in Albany in 2002 or 3 and then shifted to New Jersey where he lived. Litigation that went on for 16 years on the base defamation, I think, copyright infringement, anything.
Trade secrets.
And that case is the case in which Nancy Salzman pleaded guilty in U.S. District Court to falsifying evidence. And so they're cheaters. In other words, they use the power of the Brofman money to come after you, and then in the litigation, they cheat, they lie. It's been proven. And so...
Yeah, there was a lawyer here in Albany, some of you may know him, and he represented me for free, Thomas Gleason. And I called him up, he'd never met me, I explained to him what was going on, and he said, that's just not right. That's not right. And so he took on my case, and it was almost dismissed. And then Keith Raniere decided to sue me in New Jersey, where I lived. And so he would change venue and he would change lawyers, like some of you might change into a new outfit to go on vacation. And this went on and on and on for almost 14 years. And there were times that I would think, why would anyone continue this thing? Because I've been sued 5 times by various cults, and they would drop the litigation at a certain point where it was no longer in their best interest. Keith Raniere pursued it beyond the point of his best interest until he, in large part, exposed himself, and I think in part this led to his demise. But that was how he was. This was a guy that was like the ever-ready bunny of litigation, constantly banging the drum and pursuing Toni. Two things he could not handle: being criticized and someone just simply saying, I don't want you anymore. He couldn't handle criticism and he couldn't handle rejection. And so he pursued Toni for like 20 years and pursued me in court forever for over the doctor's reports, which were published online. And this was the way he was. He just kept going on and on until he destroyed himself.
And in your case too, it grew serious. Just as in Rick, they're trying to lure you onto a cruise ship. They have a woman posing as the mother of a NXIVM student, and he goes and meets with private investigators who turned out to be the ones that were rifling through your garbage and obtaining your banking records. And then in your instance, what year was it? It was when the email, you start getting correspondence from a woman purporting to be a Mexican journalist, and it's you and Barbara. I can't remember who else was getting those emails. There were others.
Well, if we go back to what happened with Rick, the same Israeli operative that was going after Rick was going after me. The reason that I didn't come forward with what was being done to me is I didn't have a pro bono attorney. So when I was contacted by the Village Voice and sent the dossier that they had sent them, right, for Interfor, I said thank you and ducked, because if he had left me alone when I left, I would be watching this from the sidelines as everyone else is. It's just his relentlessness of the continuing pursuit. And then the emails that I received from allegedly a reporter in Mexico asking me if I wanted to take a nice sunny trip down to Mexico, because her claim was that there wasn't anything that was being done from a journalistic standpoint that she felt was anything that was vetted or had any credibility. So I sent her the Times-Union story and the Vanity Fair and the Forbes article and just a few, maybe not so great, reporters, journalists, and said, I don't know, the largest center is in Mexico, and my feeling is I'm going to go and I'm never going to come back. And what she didn't realize is while I was emailing back and forth these correspondence, I was BCCing in people like Chet Harden and Jim Odato and the producers over at Dateline and Nightline and people, Vanity Fair, people that I gained relationships and trust with, and saying, what do you think? Do you think this is legitimate? Do you have any? And Jim's response back was pack light, which I thought was funny. Like, thanks, Jim, I appreciate it. And Chet sent me like a list of questions, like, what kind of journalist sends anything from a Hotmail account? So I got all that. And Nightline.
And sounds just like Keith Raniere.
Right, exactly. Well, it was funny because the first email there was very broken English, and then all of a sudden her English came back, and I went, okay, so you lost your accent on the second one. But the ability to just constantly pursue this was relentless.
And you think of the connections Keith has, right? He's
Right.
Emiliano Salinas, who's the son of a former Mexican president, is one of his close confidants in Mexico. So he's got connections there that are real, that are threatening, and he communicates with him through. They came up with this interesting. I don't remember if it was Gmail or was it Gmail?
Yeah.
Gmail, that they would write a draft message and then save the draft, and the other guy would log in and read the draft, change it, and that's how they would never send the email thinking that it was untraceable, which I don't think that is the case. So it was just this way to secretly communicate, and that's probably where some of that communication was taking place. You know, there was an effort to lure his female defectors to Mexico, and according to Kristen Keith, to have them thrown in a Mexican prison and have terrible things done to them. So
I mean, the last thing Keith said to me when I saw him in April of 1999 is, the next time I see you, you will be dead or in jail. And he was half right, because he's only half as smart as he says he is. The next time I saw him, he was in jail, only he was in jail. So I smiled at him and said, hey, you're half right. Nice to see you again. He just, you know, his relentless pursuit of people that just, when Tom Gleason, right? Tom Gleason worked with Rick. He contacted me and he said, so you know him better than anyone, which is a frightening thought in itself. What do we do? And I said, just tell him he's wrong. He said, about what? I said, about anything. The weather, the color of your shirt, whatever, and just stick with it, and he'll implode. He can't ever be wrong. And anyone leaving him is a sign of his, you know, that he's infallible. So.
NXIVM on Trial is a production of the Times-Union. Our watchdog reporting on NXIVM and other topics is supported in large part by our subscribers. If deep coverage of issues that matter to the Capital Region is important to you and your family, please consider signing up for our digital subscription today. Just visit timesunion.com. Thanks, and enjoy the show.
what was your first interactions with Nancy like? You know, and in the 90s, it seemed that was a match made in heaven when Keith and Nancy
Or hell.
met one another, and yes, sir, and she brought something to the table that seemed to fill a niche in that human improvement element, and it was critical. And I mean, it really, in many ways, didn't it, Rick? It affirmed, you know, it gave him credibility to have somebody, because Nancy was a clinical. No, she was a registered nurse.
Yes,
right?
thank
Or
you.
as I
Right.
used to call her Nurse Nancy.
Nurse
Right.
Nancy, yes.
And I think, what, psychotherapy, which is
Well,
a
no,
made-up
she
term.
She made
was-
that up, yes.
She was a practitioner of NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, which, if you study it, it's a way of manipulating people without informed consent. You read their body language, their breathing, the way they communicate, and you purposely try to reach them because you have studied them in ways that they're not aware of. And Nancy was a practitioner of NLP, and she had been through large group awareness training. She had been through seminars, and she brought to the table a lot to Keith Raniere so that he could begin to construct these seminars, and he understood NLP, and she would help him. And then there was also an ex-member of Scientology that was involved with Keith, and he would study Scientology relentlessly. And it was when one of the Sutton family gave me the study notes from the course curriculum that I realized, oh my God, this is Scientology. Because, you know, Scientology had harassed me, hired private investigators to pursue me, and I've been through similar experiences with them. And he had studied Scientology in great detail. So, for example, the term suppressive person, or SP, was lifted from Scientology. And the whole idea that he was dealing with the negative reactive mind through the exploration of meaning was from Scientology. And then also, I might add, his way of suing people into bankruptcy was vintage Scientology. I mean, that's what Scientology does. They threaten you with relentless litigation. They will sue you and sue you and sue you. So Keith Raniere got a lot from Nancy Salzman and a lot from different sources. And he, like many other cult leaders, created a kind of composite. And that's what ultimately NXIVM was.
What was it like for you to be around, you know, Nancy? What do you remember about your interactions with her, and especially her role in the, you know, as the organization really started to take shape, ESP in the late 90s?
Well, you know, some of this I talk about in the book, but Keith has always had a draw to NLP. I think anything where he could learn how to manipulate someone he was using. And even back in the early CBI days, we had a woman that worked at CBI, and she was an NLP expert. She would go into each one of our rooms, cubicles, talk to us, make sure we were okay. So he already had the idea, the concept. And I look at what he does is he kind of escalates with he upgrades each woman, he upgrades each project. And Nancy, when Nancy came to National Health Network, she was very well respected in the community. She was an NLP expert, to her description, #2 in the world in hypnosis and in NLP. She had some major corporations, Cabrini Nursing Home, American Express, Con Edison. And I think what he saw in Nancy was his next best thing. We were selling vitamins. Yeah, we were selling vitamins in Clifton Park and in Saratoga, Scotia, and Ames, Iowa. He was not being adolicized. He wasn't getting what he needed from people. I was happy doing what I was doing, but he needed more than that. And I think he saw Nancy as his next way to get to that.
Was there a sense at some point? I think it was in a transcript of Kristen's call where she described the women doing all the work and Keith kind of walking the neighborhood, pontificating, wasting time. I mean, I know that you write about he played video games at times during the day when CBI was running. So.
Right, he's lazy. I mean, and the women around him were producers. I mean, we worked hard, and that's what he saw. So what he wanted to do was just kind of gain as much as he could from the women that he had around him. But Nancy had a successful business when he met her. But like all the other women that I think that he drew in, were there's a piece in their life that was broken. And he listened, and he listened, and he found Nancy's, and he drew her in. And he drew her in with her own. I mean, NLP was supposed to be really what she was an expert at, and he spun it on her. So the coursework that they turned into Executive Success Program that he claims to have created, Nancy already had. He just kind of repackaged it and renamed it and convinced her that he created it.
And as you go through the 2000s, Keith is weathering some bad press along the way. Whether the Times Union Chet incinerates him with some stories on his kidnap plot and other things. And Keith always has a way to convince his followers that they're lies, the government's out to get them, the media's out to get them. None of it can be believed. But then in 2009, he scores a big hit with the Brofmans, who are part of him now, especially Claire. They use their connections and they get the Dalai Lama to come to Albany and to basically embrace Keith. And this seemed to be a turning point for him, do you think? Or, in a way, it was great validation for him, although I don't know that it fully worked. But what do you think, Rick? I mean,
I wrote about this in my book because the Dalai Lama, in my opinion, is for sale. And Shoko Asahara, a notorious cult leader in Japan who gassed the Tokyo subway systems with sarin, and thousands of people were rushed to the hospital, he had a photo op with the Dalai Lama, and the Dalai Lama admitted that he received $2 million from Shoko Asahara. And even after the Tokyo gassing catastrophe, he said, well, he wasn't very good, but he's still my friend. That's what the Dalai Lama said. So when the Dalai Lama was coming here to Albany, there were many, many people who really tried to inform him and who believed in him and who said, please don't do this. Don't lend your name and the prestige of who you are to this man. He's an evil man. And they would show him articles, reports, all kinds of information. The Dalai Lama knew what he was getting into. And I would think that when he came to Albany, the fact that there were no schools, not even Rensselaer, that would give him a venue, and he ended up in an old theater here and in Albany that was rented by the group. He must have known that something was wrong. I mean, this is a man who was feted at Harvard and the Ivy League schools. as venues for his speeches. And suddenly nobody wants to even give him an auditorium at a local college in Albany. What went wrong? Well, he knew what went wrong, and rumor has it, and I think the rumors are true, that he got a really big check from the Bronfmans. They went to India after he had said, well, maybe I'm not going to come. And then they went to India, and the next thing you know, he's coming. And I believe that they gave him a very large check, and that's what motivated him. So the Dalai Lama, in my opinion, not the greatest guy. I mean, because he actually put a award sash, a white scarf-like thing, around Keith Raniere's neck and had him on the stage, and even kind of slyly insinuated that maybe the media had gotten it wrong. You know, that they didn't really see Raniere for the good guy he was. I mean, that's the Dalai Lama. I just really was deeply disappointed in him.
And so at some point along the way, you become, I mean, you're an adversary now, you both are, and then people are starting to reach out to you, whether it's journalists, other defectors, maybe people who have family in there, and what would become fuel for NXIVM to pursue journalists and other adversaries, Barbara and yourself, was an email account, a login, right? That a former student gives you their login, and to go, but you couldn't get far, right, with that login. I think you could go in and look at certain things on their website that might be proprietary, and that becomes a vehicle then for them to come after you and to come after some journalists and others who had purportedly used this login, and it was a state police investigation, and despite them being told other things about NXIVM about and having stories published even too about, you know, his sex with underage girls and stuff, they choose to pursue the people who use these logins.
Right.
And at the same time, NXIVM's attorneys here in Albany, and I remember going through Investigator Kursop's reports and adding it up, and it was contact with him dozens of times where they would call or email this investigator pressing him, when are you going to bring criminal charges against these people? When are you going to charge these people with a crime? So talk about that a little bit, and that turning point too, where you've survived some of the early attacks and now this comes along. What was this like?
Well, we thought we'd found an ally in Roger Kursop because there was, you know, Joseph O'Hara and I had spent a lot of time putting together information and sending it at one point to the Attorney General's office, and packets of information showing everything from visa fraud, tax fraud. I mean, there was lists, and our response back was, stop sending them, we'll get back to you, which was, you know, kind of shocking.
The Attorney General didn't want anything to do with it. They ignored the information that was being brought to them, that it was very detailed information too.
And this was, I think it was 2011. And then I don't recall how Roger Kursop came into our orbit, but he was a local police with the...
Yeah, he's a state police investigator who at the time was based in the Clifton Park Malta Barracks.
Mhm.
So the case gets assigned to him because the trespass, I would assume because the complainants are in his district. That could be the reason.
Well, they claimed that they claim it was in his district, but I don't know how a server that they're claiming was allegedly hacked went from Saratoga County to Albany County. It must have flown there, but it's forum shopping, so wherever they could get whoever they could to prosecute, that's what they did.
What happened was, just to back that up, at the time, the NXIVM people are floating this case to the Saratoga County District Attorney, who was then Jim Murphy. He wanted nothing to do with prosecuting these people for a computer trespassing allegation. So the case is still with the state police, who can have jurisdiction in any county. So then NXIVM convinces the Albany County DA's office that, hey, guess what? Our servers are actually in a commercial building in downtown Albany, so you have jurisdiction to take this case now. that in and of itself was quite questionable.
You think?
Yeah, so-
Mike, you want to respond?
And so this ultimately formed the basis for them to pursue you criminally and to pursue you civilly.
Yes.
Mike Greigel is here in the front, an Albany attorney with Greenberg Troig, represented Susanna Andrews in that case, who wrote for Vanity Fair and wrote a 2009 great article, The Heiresses and the Cult. 10, okay. And so, what sort of damage did that do to you now? How does this, this is you've been gone now for quite some time,
Yes.
and here they are still rocking your world,
Right.
right?
Yeah, still trying to rock my world. I mean, for Keith, silencing anyone that was willing to stand up and speak out publicly was his number one goal. And as people would come and join forces, so there was one and then there was more, he had to really do something to try to stop that. And when the media was supporting some of the stories, media like the Times-Union, like Vanity Fair, they had to do what they needed to do or tried to do to silence the media. And they came close. I mean, they hit pretty hard. And then Mike Greigel wrote what I call the chart of lies. It was so, there was so much going on that I call it the chart of lies. It was, what did they say? Here's the proof and here's the document. What did they say? And here's the proof and here's the document. And when he finally put that beautiful piece together and sent it in, the case was thrown out because Claire had clearly perjured herself. But, when you have that kind of money, you don't get charged with perjury. You just go on to brand people later on because...
And this is in the criminal case you're...
Yes.
Yeah. And so that...
No, this is the civil case.
The civil case.
Yes.
Indeed.
But, I mean, if they had stopped it at that point, that someone had addressed the things that, was brought up in just that case alone, it could have stopped them. But
And what they were doing is they would send you an email. I got one around 2005. And they sent me an email, and it said, I am an ex-member or a disenchanted member of NXIVM. And I have the password to get into the members-only website of NXIVM, where you can see what they're doing, photographs, all kinds of stuff. And here's the password, and you can use it. And the first thing I did was call my attorneys, Peter Skolnick and Douglas Brooks. And I said, what do you guys think? And they said, don't use it. It's some kind of setup. And then later, when I was in federal court as a witness in the prosecution of Keith Raniere, the prosecutor came up to me and showed me a file that they had that was seized in Nancy Salzman's home here. And they had a file on Toni, they had a file on me, they had a file on several people. And I later learned from Toni, who had sat through the trial, that the Seagram's executive who testified about what happened with the Bronfmans during the trial, that he said that at one point Claire Bronfman came to him and said, there must be some way that we can criminally come after me. And he dismissed it, and he said, we can't do that. And he commented that he thought that she had become unhinged. But this was what they were doing. They were trying to set up criminal cases in which they could ensnare people, and that's what they did to a number of people, and it was just really nefarious.
And that's part one of the Times-Union's panel discussion on NXIVM. This episode, in addition to the Times-Union's continued NXIVM coverage available in print and online, is made possible with the support of Jeff Anderson and Associates. The second and final part will be available soon, so keep an eye out wherever you download podcasts. And be sure to check out the Times-Union's other podcast, Capital Confidential, which offers an insider perspective on the politics and policies in Albany. Thanks for listening.